Action cameras, definitely not a topic that's going to interest everybody out there, but I do happen to know that the humble action cam is becoming quite a popular aftermarket accessory for a lot of motorcyclists. I know personally for me, it wasn't long after I got back into riding that I had a camera strapped to my helmet, and there's definitely nothing wrong with that. Now, if you are looking into filming your rides, or maybe your current camera setup isn't working too well for you, hopefully this video will give you some helpful information as to what other options might be out there for you. G'day guys, my name's Josh from MVDBR. Admittedly, the title of this video might be considered a little bit clickbaity. These cameras aren't all rubbish, but they definitely all have their weaknesses, but likewise they all have their strengths as well. And I think if someone could combine the best parts of all three of these cameras into one, you'd pretty much have the perfect action camera. Now, I don't consider myself to be any kind of photography or camera videography expert, but I do have a fair bit of experience with all three of these camera brands. Now, I know there are a lot of other camera brands out there, but the GoPro, the DJI and the Sony are the three that I've used. One other fairly popular contender at the moment is the Insta range of action cameras. Now, they do a lot of the 360 cameras as well. I have looked into the Insta action cameras and I haven't really found anything there enticing enough to make me try them out. I do like the 360 cams, but I feel like they're only really useful as a secondary sort of backup cam. Maybe hang it off your bike somewhere, get some cool angles with it, but as a primary action camera, they're not really all that good. Now, I know what I want from an action camera. It's not that complicated, I don't think, but it does encompass decent audio. I think if you're serious about making videos for YouTube or whatever, you've got to realize that audio is just as important as having quality video. And basically that means for a motorcycle you need to have an external microphone inside your helmet to get your voice. So the non-negotiable things that I need in an action camera are, number one is reliability. It's got to work. It has to turn on when I want it to. Also, of course, you want decent video quality. I don't do 4K and all that shit. Basically, as long as it can do decent 1080p at 60 frames per second, that's the meat and potatoes of what I record in. So as long as it's got a decent bit rate at 1080p, then I'm happy. Also, of course, decent stabilization is fairly important. None of us wants to go back to the old shaky cam days. Now we've had a taste of stabilization. And as I mentioned, decent audio quality is a must. I like nice, easy operation. When you're working with a camera mounted to your helmet and you've usually got gloves on and stuff, you don't want to be fiddling around pressing multiple buttons just to record. You need that one touch record, one touch to stop. You really want a replaceable lens cover when you're doing dirt bike videos. As you might have seen in one of our recent videos, one of our Osmo Actions got a cracked lens cover from a rock. If it's a replaceable lens cover, it's only $30 to basically replace that cover rather than having to send the camera in to get fixed or replace the whole thing. I like a decent recording indicator, like a light flashing or glowing or whatever, to let me know that the camera's on. It sort of doesn't matter how long you've been doing videos like this. There's always times when you forget to turn the camera off and you find your SD card's filling up with crap that you don't want to record. So as long as there's some kind of indicator there that's flashing or whatever that you can see, that at least reminds you to eventually turn it off when you don't want to be recording. Action camera needs to be easy to mount to a helmet. Some are easier than others. Also, being able to charge the camera on the go as you're riding is awesome. It's a lot better than having to buy tons of extra batteries and then swap them out during the day when they go flat. If you can charge on the go, you know that the camera's always charged, ready to go. A few optional things that I like in a camera, I'd like it to be water resistant. I mean, you can't have a camera that's really waterproof when you're using an external microphone. A screen on the camera that lets you frame up what you're filming is handy, especially like a front-facing screen can be good if you're doing some vlogging with a camera or whatever. But it's not, to me, it's not a necessity. Some really high frame rates are also good for doing your slow motion, like 120 or 240 frames a second. Makes really good slow motion footage, but again, I don't use it that often. And finally, the ability to do time lapses and nighttime like star lapses and that sort of stuff is also cool, but again, not a deal breaker if the camera doesn't have it. Okay, so let's start with the GoPro. We can pretty much wipe the GoPro off the table right off the bat because it fails my first requirement quite dismally. It's an unreliable camera, guys. Now the GoPros are great cameras, but you know, you can have the best resolution, the highest bit rate, the greatest quality video, audio, whatever, all the features, all the bells and whistles, but if the damn thing doesn't come on when you want it to, what's the good of it, you know? So for example, picture this, right? You're riding along on your bike, you're turning your camera on now and then just to, you know, film some interesting scenery that you're riding past. And then you get to a boring part, turn the camera off. And then all of a sudden, an elephant runs out of the bush or something and starts charging towards your mate. Now you go to turn your GoPro on and nothing happens. Okay. Meanwhile, your mate's got knocked off his bike, his Honda's getting trampled into the ground by this elephant, and you're going, what the fuck, you know, I'm missing all this. You've got to unplug the battery or press that power button for 10 seconds or whatever the hell it is to reset the camera before it will turn on. Meanwhile, your mate's picked himself up off the ground, dusted himself off and ridden off again. And you know, you've missed the action. And that's just something that happened with us way too often. Yeah, it drove me to insanity, that GoPro. Now, I know a lot of people will say that they have no worries with their GoPros. They're reliable as anything, but I don't know what's going on. We had 3 of the GoPro Hero 7 Blacks, all exactly the same. Occasionally the screen would freeze up while you were using it, but by far the most common problem was that not turning on at all. So, you know, you'd turn the camera off normally, go to turn it back on, nothing, until you reset it. I searched around on the internet trying to find answers. There were a lot of other people with the same problem, not a lot of answers. People suggested updating the firmware, reflashing the firmware manually, resetting the factory settings, trying a different SD card, different battery. We tried all that. In the end, we just got rid of the GoPros. So that was obviously an older generation. The Hero 7 Blacks are a couple of years old now, but from the reviews I've seen online, a lot of them are saying that the Hero 8 and the Hero 9s haven't got any better, you know, they're still buggy. So obviously GoPro isn't interested in fixing the problem, or they can't fix the problem, but I can tell you 3 out of 3 for us, and that was enough. All right, so after the GoPros were gotten rid of, we went to the DJI Osmo Action. This is about 9 months ago now, so we've been using those for quite a while. What I can say about the Osmo is when you press that record button, it turns on and records every time. I've not had one single issue. We've also got 3 of the Osmos. They've all been perfect. We've never had any reliability problems with them. They've just been really good. The Osmo Action is a couple of years old now. I think it came out in 2019. It will be interesting to see if DJI come out with an updated version, the Osmo Action 2 or something. So obviously the Osmos are very similar in appearance to the GoPros, although they are smaller now than the current generation of GoPros. I think the Hero 8 and 9, they just keep getting bigger and bigger, which sort of reinforces the theory that GoPro have forgotten what an action camera is for. You know, you don't want this big thing, big heavy unit on a helmet or whatever you're mounting it to. You know, it's meant to be small and compact. So why is the Osmo Action not the perfect camera? Well, the biggest problem for me personally is the audio. Again, going back to audio, this thing it has the worst audio out of all 3 of these cameras, hands down. Now, obviously you can get a microphone adapter for the Osmo. It is smaller and a lot cheaper than the GoPro version, but it's not very good. Now, basically for off the bike recording, when you're doing vlogging or, you know, just recording stuff with it, it's acceptable. It's not great. I find that the volume levels are all over the place with this camera. So it takes a lot of work when you're doing your editing to get all the audio to sort of within QE of each other, so it's not loud here and really quiet there. But you know, off the bike, it's okay. I can work with that. It's when you're on the bike, you've got a microphone inside your helmet, you've got all that wind noise. This thing just can't cope. Half the time the audio is too low, you can't hear anything. The other half the time it's blown out and it's all distorted and your voice sounds like shit. So definitely they need to work on the audio on this camera. We have tried a whole bunch of different microphones with this, trying to get better audio with it. The best that I've found so far is the drift microphone, which I'm still using with the Sony. It does a pretty good job of cutting out a lot of the noise, and a lot of the other microphones we tried, but just way too loud. The drift is the best, but it's still not good. So yeah, the Osmo Action definitely has the worst audio out of all three of these cameras, which is unfortunate because it does have a lot of good features as well. Okay, now for comparison, this is the audio from the Osmo Action. I've got the visor open at the moment. I'm doing about 40 kilometers an hour. This is how it comes untouched out of the camera. I haven't done anything to adjust it, using exactly the same, exactly the same microphone setup as the Sony. But yeah, even the bike doesn't sound as good through this camera, I don't think, and the voice quality definitely is not up there either. Definitely the faster you go, it gets exponentially worse with this camera, whereas the Sony seems to handle more speed quite well. I'm doing about 60 kilometers an hour with my visor open. I close the visor, a little bit better I suppose, but compared to the Sony it's just really bad. Alright, so this is the Osmo Action at about 90 kilometers an hour. So it's hard to get a good sound out of this camera because if you talk low, it's hard to hear you. If you talk too loud, it just goes all distorted. So yeah, it's really hard to get anything decent out of it.
You know what? After watching that footage back while doing this edit, that audio really doesn't seem all that bad. And that's the thing about the Osmo, it can be good, sometimes it's shit, it's pretty unpredictable. But yeah, for a lot of people it's probably going to be good enough. I'm just kind of looking for that next level good audio, you know. Anyway, on with the show.
A couple of other small gripes with the Osmo. The view angle isn't quite wide enough. You know, with GoPro you've got your super view. The Sony even has a really nice wide view. This is not quite wide enough. It's okay, it's acceptable to me. It's not a deal breaker, but it would be nice if you had a wider angle. And the angle is not adjustable in the camera other than if you disable the stabilization, makes it a little bit wider, but you know, again, who's going to do that these days? It's 2021, we want stabilized footage, and you just can't have stabilization and a nice wide angle with the Osmo.
Alright guys, so as you can hopefully see there, I've got both the DJI and the Sony attached to my helmet, and man, it feels heavy. But I'm going to try and get a bit of comparative footage from both cameras, just so you can see the different field of view. You should be able to see a lot more of the bike, and you know, a much wider field of view from the Sony, whereas the DJI is sort of, yeah, you can't see so much because it's a narrower field of view. And hopefully you'll also be able to see the difference in quality too. But both cameras do, you know, reasonably good video, so yeah. So yeah, as much as I do like having the nice centered chin mount on the DJI, and as we did also with the GoPro, it is really cool having that wide field of view from the Sony. I do think it is a lot better for motorcycle riding, having that nice wide angle.
Also, the lens does fog up now and then with this camera. When you're recording for quite a while, the camera heats up quite a bit and that lens will fog up, so you've got to keep an eye on that. It can ruin your footage. And finally, the other thing that's not great about this camera is the stabilization is pretty bad in low light situations. So if you've got a nice bright day, stabilization is just as good, if not better, than the GoPro. So what's good about the Osmo Action then? Well, obviously for starters, the reliability, as I mentioned. You want to record something, it comes on when you press the button. That's, you know, it's a huge advantage to any camera. The only time the Osmo has failed to come on for me is when the battery is actually flat. So yeah, other than that, it's been great. The Osmo does really good quality video, in my opinion. The bitrate is around about 80 megabits per second with 1080 60 frames per second, which is pretty good. The touchscreen on this camera is really good too. The menus and settings on this camera are just way more intuitive. It's a lot easier to switch between different modes that you use on this camera as well, which is great. It's super easy to charge the DJI Osmo Action on the go with a USB cable. We just use this magnetic style cable, but I'll go into that a bit more later. Now, like the GoPros, the Osmo Action is waterproof without a separate dive case. Now, obviously, if you've got a microphone adapter attached, you need to remove the door, so it's not waterproof anymore. But that's the same for all of these cameras. As I mentioned, the mic adapter itself, even though it is shit, it's quite small and unobtrusive. It just attaches to the camera. The front-facing screen on the Osmo is really good as well. Helps when you're doing your vlogging and stuff. You can see if you're in the shot and if it's exposed well and all that stuff. I've actually put a clear bit of plastic over that front-facing screen just to protect it from rocks and stuff. If you crack this lens, you can replace it. Crack that one, you've stuffed your camera pretty much. The Osmo Action has all the features you might need from a camera. As I mentioned, it's got stabilization, it's got 240 frames per second, slow motion, does time lapses. You can adjust the shutter speed to do your nighttime time lapses. It's got hyperlapse and all those photo options that, let's face it, nobody really uses with an action camera, but they are there if you want them. Alright, finally guys, we're on to the Sony, the FDR-X3000. Very long name for a very weird looking camera. Now the only reason I've ended up with this camera is I was in the middle of doing an edit of some Osmo Action footage, trying to get some volume levels normalized. Got the shits, went onto Facebook Marketplace, had a bit of a search for action cameras. I knew that the Sony has the microphone jack in the back. I know a lot of people get great audio out of this camera. I found one not far from me. It said the camera was brand new, hadn't even been used, just been taken out of the box. They wanted a really good price for it, so I jumped on it. Thought, what the hell, I'm gonna give it a go. So I have used the older Sony action cameras in the past. That's sort of pretty much what I got started on, the old AS20 or AS15 or something it was, and then the AS50. Both of those had pretty poor quality video back in the day. But the Sony FDR-X3000 is still one of the only, if not the only, action camera with a direct 3.5mm microphone input. Go figure, you know. So I've been using the Sony for about a month now, and I've had a bit of a chance to see how it stacks up against the other two. Now firstly, the audio out of this little camera is nothing short of amazing. I'm not sure what other microphones are going to work well with this camera, but I know that the drift mic that I've been using with the Osmo Action works great with this one. It does a really good job of leveling the audio volumes in pretty much any situation. You're sitting there talking to the camera without the engine running. It's nice and loud. You start the bike up and you start riding, it adjusts it accordingly, and it's always nice and clear. So yeah, even at highway speeds inside a helmet, this thing does a really good job of picking up audio and leveling it out nicely. Personally, I think it's better than GoPro, and it definitely blows the Osmo Action out of the water in that regard. And you know what, at the end of the day, it does all that without having a stupid microphone adapter attached to it. It's amazing. So this is the audio on the Sony FDR-X3000, cruising along at about 70 kilometers an hour with the visor closed on the helmet, running the drift microphone, just tucked behind the cheek part of the helmet. It's probably the best audio that I've ever gotten from an action camera while, you know, riding on a bike. Even with the visor open, that's with the visor open now, it should still be perfectly, you know, understandable what I'm saying. Obviously there's quite a lot of wind noise, which affects the quality of the audio, but you know, it's still pretty good.
Alright, now we're moving along at about 90 kilometres an hour. Audio should still be perfectly understandable. Have the visor closed. With the visor open at this speed, it's probably, you know, going to be pretty bad because, you know, it is quite a lot of wind noise. But yeah, compared to the Osmo or even the GoPro, it's really good audio.
So does this awesome audio come at the cost of video quality? Well, yes and no. My opinion of the footage that comes out of this camera is it's okay. It's not great, but it's not shit. To quantify that a little bit, the bit rate's a little bit low on this camera. At 1080-60, it records at 50 megabits per second. Compared to the Osmo Action, which does 80 megabits per second at 1080, you know, that number can make quite a bit of difference, especially when you're filming in really thick foliage with a lot of branches and leaves and a lot of detail for the camera to capture, especially if you're moving through it quite fast. That's when this camera will struggle a little bit with the quality. But at the end of the day, as we all know, as soon as you upload that footage to YouTube, it gets squashed within an inch of its life anyway and loses all its quality. So for YouTube, not a big deal. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure what the current generation of GoPros, what bit rate they record at, but I know that a lot of them do now use the HEVC codec, which is a lot different to the old AVC codec. So they're getting a lot better quality at lower bit rates with that HEVC. Another thing I have noticed with the Sony too is it doesn't have great dynamic range. So if you're filming something that's got shadow in one part of the frame and then, you know, bright sky or something like that in another part, the shadows will be really, really dark and the sky will be blown out. You know, we're talking about an action camera here. You can't expect it to be perfect, but I feel like both the GoPro and the DJI have a bit better dynamic range than the Sony. Again, guys, I'm not an expert on this stuff. This is just basically my perception, what I've noticed with these cameras. Now, aside from everything else, the one major reason I was hesitant to even go back to a Sony camera is the form factor of this thing. I mean, look at it. To me, this thing just isn't the right shape to be mounting to your helmet. The chin mount is my favorite camera mount. I guess a lot of the people that run these Sony cameras don't mind sticking it on the side of their helmet, but you know, that introduces the helmet into your shot. So, you know, a lot of the time the helmet's blocking off a portion of your field of view. Some people don't seem to mind that. Some people even reckon they prefer having the helmet in the shot, but those people are wrong, clearly. But no, seriously, for me, I'm not a fan of that, having the helmet in the footage. Now, another problem with having the camera mounted to the side of your helmet is you've got no hope of being able to see any of the flashing lights, letting you know if you're recording, which, as I mentioned, is you know, a big thing for me. I like to be able to see when I'm recording. I have kind of managed to fix those problems by mounting my Sony near the front of the helmet there on the chin bar. That eliminates the helmet from the field of view, and it also allows me to see this LED indicator here to let me know when it's recording. I've actually stuck a little bit of PVC tubing on top of that there, which reflects the light back in. Without that, I couldn't really see it at all. But yeah, even if I just hold it like that with my hand, I can easily see that red light on, and I know that it's recording. So that solved that problem. Now, something else that is a bit of a consideration with the camera mounted like this is if you get vines and branches coming in between there, very easy to rip the camera off with that sort of stuff. So you do have to be a bit more careful with that, as opposed to a chin mounted camera. The Sony does have a nice wide field of view, which is also adjustable. You can select a medium or a narrow field of view if you want to. Unfortunately, that doesn't have any sort of screen on it, so you can't see what you're filming. You can actually hook your phone up to it wirelessly to use that as a monitor, or they do have like a wristwatch live view remote, I think they call it, which is an optional extra for this camera, lets you preview what you're seeing with the camera. The Sony has optical image stabilization, which does look a lot more natural, I think, than the electronic stabilization that you get with the GoPro and the DJI. It isn't as stable, but it's still pretty good. And the good thing about being optical is it doesn't have to crop the image at all, as with electronic stabilization, and also it works really well well, just as well in low light as bright light. Adjusting settings on this camera is pretty bad. It's got an old style monochrome LCD screen that you got to press buttons to get through. But once you've got it set up to how you want to use it, it's pretty easy to turn on and off with that record button. But yeah, if you want to change to different frame rates and stuff, you know, there's a lot of buttons to press and stuff. It can be a bit of a pain in the butt. The X3000, I think, has been discontinued now. I know it was released back in 2017, so it is fairly dated by today's standards. I do believe some retailers still do have them in stock, and you can pick them up secondhand for a good price. And even if you do grab a secondhand one, you can get new batteries on eBay for quite cheap. So yeah, spare batteries and accessories are quite decently priced for this camera too. So I'll go into a bit of how I've set this camera up to suit, you know, what I need to do with it. Basically, you're definitely better off using this dive case on the bike, you know, not for making it waterproof so much as keeping the dust off and keeping rocks off it. So you do need to remove a little back flap off the back of the camera so that you can put it into the dive case and still get access to that microphone port. There'll be a link in the description to Everride's video. He's got a quick vid of explaining how to remove that back flap thing without actually cutting it off. You can remove it with, and it's quite easy to do. Then of course you also need to drill a hole in the dive case to be able to get a mic into that plug. But if you make it exactly the right size for your mic plug, you can make it pretty well water resistant, splash proof at least anyway. You probably noticed I've also set mine up for charging on the go. This is just a short USB, micro USB extension lead with a female plug on one end, male on the other. I had to make a hole in the case exactly the right size for that USB plug to go in there. And as you can see, I've glued it in there with some two-part epoxy. I've just switched over to recording on the DJI, guys. The camera I was using has gone flat. Anyway, where was I? I'm going to put links to a lot of this stuff in the description, guys, if any of you guys are interested in it. But yeah, I had to cut a hole the right size and shape for that USB plug to go through into the camera. I've also glued it there just to stop it coming out, basically. I can still remove the camera from the case. The plug stays there, and then when I put it back in, it plugs itself back in. So that works really well. And with that mic plug being a nice tight fit, I think, you know, I wouldn't be too worried about riding in the rain with this camera. It should be pretty well rainproof. I definitely wouldn't submerge it in water how it is, but for rain, I think it'd be fine. If you've never tried using the charging on the go method, I can definitely recommend it. It's way better than stopping to change out batteries all the time. I probably wouldn't recommend it so much for enduro riding, but for enduro riding, you probably wouldn't be using an external microphone anyway, and you know, you'd want your camera to be waterproof more so than adventure riding. But with adventure riding, obviously, you've normally got USB or external power on your bike, so you can easily plug it into your camera to charge it on the go. As I mentioned earlier, we use a magnetic charging cord, so that's just a small USB plug there with connectors on it. You plug that into your cable, and the cable that's on your bike connects straight up to that. So the good thing about that is it's easy to connect it while you're riding, and if you happen to jump off the bike, forget that it's connected, it just pulls off. You know, it's not going to rip out your cord and damage shit. So they work really well. You can get USB-C as well as lightning connectors for these. So, you know, so basically I can plug it into this camera, pull it off, whack it into the DJI camera. It was the same with the GoPros. I'll put a link to these magnetic cables too, guys. They're really good, really well worth it if you're going to charge on the bike. And also at home, I have one of the same cables plugged into my PC. So when I get home, when I upload the footage, it's just a matter of plugging that, or sticking that straight on there, and it works to transfer the footage onto my PC. So yeah, you don't have to fart around trying to plug shit in. Very simple. And it also saves your USB ports from wearing out, plugging them and unplugging them all the time. So yeah, 100% recommend those magnetic cables. We've been using those for ages now, and they work so well. So yeah, as I mentioned before, guys, this is just a GoPro buckle, pretty much just stuck to the helmet with Sugru. That's a silicone sort of glue. Works really well, it ain't going anywhere. I've made up a custom sort of buckle here for the bottom of the Sony dive case, which goes onto a J mount for the GoPro, and that just clips straight on there, works really well. Mic cord goes in there. DJI setup is pretty much the same. I've just got a GoPro flat mount screwed to the front of the helmet. Camera slips straight into there. No problem. And I've managed to get a nice straight angle with this mount on the Sony. So yeah, it's quite good. So anyway guys, I'm going to be sticking with the Sony for the on the bike action camera for now, the main camera. We're sticking with a DJI Osmo Action for all other stuff, off the bike filming, campsite stuff, walking around, vlogging, whatever. It's fine for that sort of stuff. GoPro I won't be touching until they fix their problems, if they ever do. There are a lot of other options out there. Look around, see what's best going to suit your needs, but if you want great audio, you can't go past that Sony. And as I said, audio is pretty important. You may not think so at first, as I didn't, but yeah, when you start really getting into the videos, you got to have that good audio. But yeah, that's me, and that's a wrap, guys. I've talked for far too long. I think my voice is starting to go. If you've made it this far into the video, as always, good on you, well done. If you enjoyed the vid, please consider subscribing, give it a thumbs up. We'll see you guys on the next one. Cheers.
Just want to try and see if I can get an example of the dynamic range of these cameras. That bright light, it's hard to reproduce, but good to see old T7 sound through the Sony camera, eh? Bloody beautiful.